Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to today's session where we're going to be running through some of the changes between version 1 and version 2 of the Senior Healthcare Support Worker Assessment Plan. I'm Leo. You've probably met me either kind of remotely or in person over the past couple of years. I'm the Customer Success Manager on the EPA Plus team, and I tend to be the person who does a lot of these webinars, so welcome. And hello again if you've been to one of our previous webinars or watched them on YouTube. As I said, today I'm going to be running through the Senior Healthcare Support Worker Assessment Plan version 2 and what the key changes are, and really just to give you an understanding of how it's different from the previous assessment plan that you'll be familiar with. Now, this assessment plan went live in September 2018, but the format of the assessment has changed, but the assessment components themselves. So, and as well within that, the assessment criteria overall hasn't changed. So the component standard didn't change. The things that still need to be taught during the on-program learning remain the same. But what's happened is the allocation of the assessment criteria to each of the individual assessments has changed, and I'll talk through what that looks like shortly. The other changes that have happened is that the grading of the overall EPA has changed, and the assessment of the pathway-specific criteria, and I'll go into a lot more detail about that. And there are some changes to the types of assessment that form the endpoint assessment too. So the assessments, the three assessments are still broadly similar, but there are some changes there. So let's go right ahead and jump in. So here on this screen, we can really see kind of the key changes. So if we look first at the gateway requirements, there's no differences there. You can still continue to put people through gateway with exactly the same previous documentation that you would have before. Now, when we move to the first assessment on version 1, which is the one that you're mostly familiar with, it used to be a multiple choice and short answer questionnaire, but now with the version 2, that's moved just to a multiple choice questionnaire. What that means is that short answer questionnaire that used to contain the pathway specific questions, that has been removed, and there's now a number of pathway specific questions within each of the multiple choice tests. Within assessment 2, so this used to just be an observation of practice that took place, but now it's an observation of practice that's followed by an optional question and answer session. And we'll go into more detail about what that question and answer session looks like. So for the third assessment, that used to be a learning journal and an interview, and now it's a professional discussion that is underpinned by a portfolio. You notice that the types of assessment there are similar, but there are some key differences to watch out for, which we'll go through in detail. On the available grades for version 1, you used to be able to get a merit at endpoint assessment, but now that's changed. So the available grades on version 2 are fail, pass, and distinction. And this final change, that the blending of the criteria, as I've put it on the slide there, this is one of the key changes, and this is a little bit different in the terms that it doesn't affect it doesn't affect kind of the individual assessment criteria, but actually what it does mean is it affects where those assessment criteria can be picked up. So in version 1, any assessment criteria that have been, or some, should I say, assessment criteria that has been missed off in the multiple choice short answer questionnaire, the observation of practice, could be picked up in subsequent assessments. So those assessment criteria are blended, whereas in version 2, the assessments themselves are much more rigid, and they're looking for very, very focused assessment criteria. So within these assessments, the assessment criteria must be assessed within that assessment. And this is highlighted really, really clearly in the assessment plan, which I'll show you an example of earlier. And you can see all of these changes highlighted within the assessment plan. So if we jump straight ahead to assessment 1, in the old version, as I mentioned before, there were pathway elements that were examined within the short answer questionnaires. Now, in version 1, it was a total time of 60 minutes. The core element was 30 questions, and they were multiple choice, and the pathway element was 4 questions, and they were short answer questions. Now, in version 2, it's just multiple choice questions again. And apologies, I've made a mistake on that slide, and I should have proofed it before I put it in. But there's only multiple choice questions available on the version 2 of the assessment plan. So there's only multiple choice questions. There are 40 questions for the generic questions, and then there are 20 multiple choice questions for the pathway specific elements. And you'll notice as well that the assessment time has also been increased there. So that's now been raised to 90 minutes in total. So that assessment now takes 90 minutes for that multiple choice questionnaire. And all of those 60 questions are multiple choice. Now, moving on to assessment 2 and the observation. So that observation only assesses core elements in version 1. So the observation would only assess core elements of the standard, and areas that don't occur naturally can be investigated in that final assessment. And again, this goes back to what I mentioned earlier about the blending of the assessment criteria. So areas that don't occur here can be picked up in that final assessment. However, when we move over to version 2, the observation assesses core and pathway elements. That's a really, really key difference. So, some of the specific pathway elements may well be or do need to be seen in this particular assessment. They're highlighted in green in Appendix 1 of the assessment plan. And I'll show you an example of that assessment plan as well shortly, just so that it makes sense when I kind of describe that. And now it also has the addition of that question and answer session after the observation. Now, this question and answer session is there to pick up any criteria that don't occur naturally during that observation. So where in version 1, we had the opportunity to pick those up in the learning journal and interview. Now that is picked up in a question and answer session that happens directly after the assessment takes place. And that question and answer session doesn't necessarily have to take place. If it's a perfect observation and all of those criteria are seen, then that question and answer session that acts as a mop-up for things that didn't occur naturally doesn't need to take place. So now to look at the learning journal portfolio in the third assessment for both of these versions. And this is looking specifically at the evidence that underpins, so that learning journal and the portfolio, not the interview or the professional discussion that goes alongside. So for the old version, it was a learning journal that was based primarily on reflective accounts. And then they were all aligned to the assessment criteria that took place in the interview. And then the interview was conducted on the basis of those reflective accounts. Now, with version 2, it is quite different because instead you have a portfolio that's arranged in 7 sections to align with the domains of the standard. And the apprentice has to have collated that portfolio prior to Gateway and can bring it with them on the day. The content of the portfolio must have been generated during the apprenticeship, And this portfolio is going to form the basis of the professional discussion, much in the same way as some other standards that we endpoint assess on, and I'm sure that some of you are familiar with, so that portfolio, rather than a learning journal, is the basis, and it's based on a range of evidence, and again, arranged in those 7 sections to align with the domains of the standard. And then after that, there is the interview/professional discussion. So in the version 1 of the assessment plan, there would be a question and answer session and an opportunity to fill in any gaps in the previous 2 assessments, like we discussed previously. However, in version 2, there is a professional discussion, and that synoptically assesses the apprentice's KSBs highlighted in blue of Appendix 1. So this is a really, really important distinction to make, a distinction between an interview and a professional discussion, because an interview can be more of a question and answer session, which is, what you used to have had your apprentices be assessed against version 1. But professional discussion is exactly that. It's more of a discussion, it's more of a flow between the apprentice and the independent endpoint assessor. And again, the apprentice can bring that portfolio to the professional discussion so that they're able to use that to either remind themselves or to really prompt them and give them that opportunity to speak freely about those times that they did meet those knowledge, skills, and behaviors throughout that portfolio. So again, just to go over this in more detail, the blend of the knowledge, skills, and behaviors. So in version 1, any gaps that have been identified can be picked up in that final assessment. Whereas in version 2, that can't happen. Each assessment assesses distinct criteria, and there's no opportunity for any mop-up. Each assessment also must be passed against its own criteria. So again, we've got reference there to Appendix 1 of the assessment plan. Now, this is one of the main reasons I feel that question and answer session has been included in the observation, because where something doesn't occur naturally during the observation, which can happen, it's important to be aware of the standards that are being assessed during an observation and planning an observation for a time when an apprentice would have ample opportunity to meet those criteria. But with the best will in the world, in some observations, you're never going to be able to meet some of those criteria aren't going to arise naturally within the setting. It's just what happens. It is the nature of observation. So that question and answer session is really, really important, because then that way it does offer an opportunity to fill in some of those gaps if and where they arise. So this is looking at the assessment plan, and this is what I mean when I talk about V2 the assessment criteria example. And actually, I'm just going to open the assessment plan itself and go to Appendix 1. That's just going to take a second to pop up. So here we have the assessment plan. If we scroll down to Appendix 1, so here we have all of the assessment criteria that are contained within the standard, and they are color-coded. So anything that is detailed here in red is assessed by the multiple choice test. Anything in green is in the observation of practice, and anything in blue is via the professional discussion. So looking at the red, we'll just go through and take a couple of examples. You're able to use this to know exactly what kind of assessment criteria are used to identify the apprentice's competence using this framework. So if we look at health and well-being as an example, they're going to be assessed in the multiple choice test on their ability to carry out routine and complex clinical or therapeutic tasks delegated to them, the care plans and delegation protocols used in their organisation, the types of information you need to collate when obtaining a client history, ways to record it and share it. Now, because that's highlighted in red, that is only seen in the multiple choice test. They're not being assessed on either of those criteria in the observation of practice or in the professional discussion. And you'll see that values, those assessment criteria link to values. So you will be caring and compassionate, honest, conscientious, and committed. That's assessed via the professional discussion now. So that professional discussion is an opportunity for the apprentice to demonstrate their alignment to those values. And then if we scroll down, so actually I'll point out these are the core criteria. And then we'll go down to the optional pathways. So let's say, for example, this is an apprentice undergoing pathway 3, theatre support. So you can see that the multiple choice questionnaire is now going to look at pre and post-operative checkups, including identification, operation, site marking and pregnancy, the steps for safer surgery. It's going to look at the theatre team, its protocols, how it fits in within the organisational structure, and also safe moving and handling techniques that maintain an individual's privacy and dignity. Whereas the green and the blue criteria will be investigated during the observation and the professional discussion underpinned by the portfolio. And the assessment plan details these specifically for each of those pathways, and then all the pathways are specific to that pathway. So when doing the children and young people pathway, the apprentice will need to know, will be asked and assessed against current legal policy and service frameworks for children and young people. I hope that makes sense, and I would recommend looking at the assessment plan, because the way that it's kind of boundaried the assessment criteria off makes it easier for you to understand exactly what is going to be assessed during each assessment that takes place. So during the observation of practice, you know exactly what that observation needs to or what that apprentice needs to demonstrate during the observation. A lot of the time, people use the analogy of a driving test for endpoint assessment. And in this kind of circumstance, I'd like to expand on that to say that, through undergoing your driving test, you have different assessments that assess different criteria. So you take your theory test, and your theory test, you're being assessed against your knowledge of the theory of driving, whereas in your practical, you're being assessed against your ability to drive. You wouldn't be expected to conduct a 3-point turn within your theory test. So looking at this, it's a similar logic and a similar way applied to the assessment of the senior healthcare support worker, where the specific criteria are specific to the assessment that they're undertaken in. And it's a good way to ensure that those specific assessment criteria are being assessed in the most relevant assessment available. If I pop back over to my slide. There are a range of guidance documents as well, importantly. So the guidance documents are available on the SEPA platform now. We are going to be launching a new EPA resources platform that is going to replace the resources section only of the SEPA platform, and you'll be receiving details on how to access that over the coming week. It's really, really user friendly. It's really, really easy to use. It's it's going to be a really, really good hub for all of those EPA resources. And these resources are composed of a comprehensive assessment specification, which includes templates, multiple choice example questions. So you can use those to prepare that apprentice for that multiple choice test. And there's also the assessment specific guidance. So if I just hop out again, here we have the senior healthcare support worker specification and guidance, and this is broken down into so many different parts. So if we jump down towards the multiple choice test. It shows exactly what the structure is, exactly what will be covered, what the duration is, what the mode of delivery is, key considerations and information, and also grading. So in order to achieve the assessment, apprentices must achieve 24 marks in total, but also to achieve any grade above a fail, there must be at least 16 marks achieved within Part A and 8 marks within Part B to recognise the different components between the core and the pathway specific questions. And then if we go down again, observation and practice. So again, it details exactly what's looked at in the observation and practice, details the duration, the mode of delivery, and then also again some key considerations. And again, what the grading is. So for the observation, the apprentice must achieve 100% of the observation criteria set out within the assessment plan. And then again, as we go down to professional discussion, it details the same again. And as well details what the portfolio of evidence should look like. So it should be arranged into the 7 sections, aligning with the 6 core criteria domains and the option route domain. Examples of what evidence could be, so witness testimonies, workplace observations, reflective accounts, workbooks, work products, certificates of achievement. And, you know, within these portfolios, and there should be no more than 25 pieces of evidence. And again, we talk about this quite a lot, but when it comes to portfolios, the emphasis really is on quality over quantity, with, you know, a single piece of evidence covering off multiple assessment criteria in detail. And then again, we've got the final grade award. So you can see that in order to achieve a pass, the apprentice needs to pass each of the components. And then in order to achieve a distinction, they must achieve a pass in the observation, but the observation is capped at a pass, and a distinction at the multiple choice and the professional discussion. And then if I just go down to Appendix 3. So we have grade and descriptors. So there we have really detailed, and this is broken down in a similar way to the assessment plan, but it's not color-coded. It's broken down into sections instead. So we can see here, for the practical observation, the apprentice must achieve all of the criteria. And there's some really important recommendations. So an apprentice should act as a role model and provide direction to junior members of the team. At all times, follow the care plan. And they're full of really good and useful points. And then it details what the pathway criteria are as well. So do download those documents, do make use of them. I will make sure that they're sent out in the follow-up email as well, so that you'll have access to them in that way. And you'll just be able to access them there. They're really fantastic tools, and they're really comprehensive. They go into so much detail about the endpoint assessment, and just make sure that there's no surprises for either yourselves or for those apprentices. They detail exactly what format the EPA is going to take, and exactly what those criteria are that the apprentice needs to hit to be able to demonstrate achievement. So key timescales for version 2. And the version 2 assessment plan is currently mandated for apprentices on the children and young people pathway. So if any of you are delivering the children and young people pathway, you'll be familiar with that already. The version 2 assessment plan is available for all standards now, and the independent endpoint assessor will confirm with you, you know, which version is appropriate for that apprentice. However, the key timescale is the bottom one. So all apprentices who go through Gateway after the 1st of September on all pathways will undertake the version 2 assessment plan. So the version 1 assessment plan will no longer be available for apprentices who go through Gateway after the 1st of September. So thank you very much for joining us today. I hope that you found all of that information useful. I think the key thing now really would be to look at the guidance documents, and those guidance documents will really let you go into the detail of what's required now. We will send out any answers to questions in the follow-up email. So pop any questions that you have into the question box that's on your screen. And we will include a full breakdown of answers to those questions to give you a little bit more clarity and really enable you to dig into the detail of it. We'll send that follow-up email through, and that will contain those. And this video is also being recorded, so you'll also receive a recording of that in that follow-up email. So thank you very much. We'll keep the webinar open just for a couple more minutes, just to give everyone a chance to pop some questions in if you haven't already. But thank you very much for joining us today. Enjoy the rest of your day, and thanks.